Good morning and welcome to the 2022 InnoPower Minority Business Virtual Conference. My name is Anthony Phillips II. I serve as the Deputy Chief and Executive Director of External Equity at the state of Indiana. Our office provides guidance and support to state of Indiana agencies to normalize and operationalize equity, inclusion, and opportunity across all aspects of state workforce engagement and state services. Today, our guest is Brian Richardson, Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the Indianapolis Colts. Pleasure to have you, Brian. Welcome. Please share your education, family, and professional background with the audience.
So my family and I, we moved to Indianapolis in 2016 from Ohio. I was working at a liberal arts institution. I had an opportunity to start at Indiana University School of Public Health, expanding on my work in the DEI space. And then 2020, my wife and I, we moved to Indianapolis. So we have two beautiful children. Alexa, she's 5, and my son who's 7 months, his name's Aiden.
It's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing. Sports have often served as a model for inclusion for the rest of society. Since the first Diversity and Inclusion Coaching Mobility Report in 2013, it has been noted that the NFL has led the sports industry by intentionally hiring a diverse and inclusive workforce and increasing opportunities for minority coaches. The NFL recently required its 32 teams to employ a, quote, female or member of an ethnic or racial minority as an offensive assistant as part of the NFL's new diversity efforts. Brian, why has the NFL taken such a strong position on DEI?
Well, Anthony, I love that question. I think we're at this space now where the conversations are pushing past just conversations. That we're realizing the moment in time that we find ourselves in as a society, and a lot of these organizations, the NFL included, are seeing that there is true value in creating space. To do this, it also, there's a certain level and element of intentionality. So we have to shift from just words to now put some things in action. But what we're seeing though is that at this point now, you're hearing from the employees, you're hearing from the players, you're hearing from members in the organization and in the community who say, hey, we want to see change happen. So now, what does that look like? And we're seeing people take the steps. We're seeing organizations take the steps. And also putting in safeguards and matters of support. Because it's not just about having a face, but making sure there's the right people and they're able to succeed and thrive in their roles.
So you touched on that the players are having a voice right now. Why do you think that so many athletes are taking a stand on equity issues today?
I think it's easier now than it was back then. There was the fear of what did I have to lose in regards to endorsement deals? How would me taking a stance be viewed by the base or the audience? Where now we're seeing the shift in, again, society. Companies and organizations are speaking out on these issues. So now it's an easier opportunity for some to say, hey, you know, I too have concerns. I too have thoughts and issues related to the things that are going on. And with the platform that I have, I now can speak out on some of those things. Mm-hmm. That sports can be this place where it can bring people together. And if we utilize that platform, the message or these issues can then reach audiences that are largely unaware of what's going on. They may have never heard it from a specific point of view or perspective before, but now if they hear it from a team that they support or an organization or a player, then now I lean in a bit more because now these concepts, these ideas, these theories, these happenings, they now become a little more realistic because I didn't know that you had to deal with that. So I see how it impacts. It becomes a little more real now.
I hear you. So players are calling for a voice in this space, and it seems like some teams are responding, which brings me to a question about your work. Could you tell me a little bit about the duties that you have as Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the Indianapolis Colts?
Yeah, so I think it's about matching the energy. The players have a voice, but we also have individuals within the organization in addition to the players. They too have voices and concerns. So the creation of this position was how can we center this work and this organization in a space where we can now start to be proactive, where we can plan ahead and create space for having difficult conversations, for addressing differences that exist. How do we heal? How do we learn? How do we unlearn to then position ourselves to be able to relearn, right? If you take that journey together, so how I've conceptualized how to do this work, we operate through 4 core functional areas. The first being cultural intelligence training, and I say that versus cultural competency because I can't teach anyone how to be competent on someone else's culture, right? But what I can do is start to open that door where we can start to take that process that I mentioned earlier of the learning, the unlearning to be able to relearn. Because what we know about society, what we know about language is it's fluid, it's ever changing. So you can have all the answers today, but be problematic tomorrow. So it's giving us an opportunity to kind of check our blind spots and learn the importance and the value of this work and what we do. It's not about shaming and blaming. It's more about how can we recognize needs, realize that we have the means and abilities to create change and impact those things, and create this ongoing format of education for our current staff, right? By doing that, that now allows us to take this 2-prong approach. We can curate the space, recognize all of the identities and people that we have within the organization, and that's where we lean into that you matter and you belong, right? Creating this space, this culture of care. By doing that, we're also preparing the space for those who are going to come after us, right? Where it's easy for an organization to go out and say, hey, we're going to hire a bunch of people who look different or think different. But if the space hasn't been curated for those people, when I come in, will I feel like I'm a part of it?
Right.
How long will I stay? So by doing that, we show that we've already started to take the necessary steps to curate the space. We're going to continue that. And when you come in, here's this buffet of everything that we have to offer, from the support groups, from the connections that we built within the community. Here's how we can help you find your home to make sure that this place feels like home for you. So that's one box. Second box, community engagement, community relations. Since day one when I started in this role, I knew that there were people in the community who were dedicated to this work. With that thought, I never wanted us to be seen as the face for diversity and inclusion for the entire state or for the entire city. My goal is to align the work that we do with the people who have the passion for doing the work. We should be the boots on the ground, working with those different demographics, supporting those communities, finding out what the necessary tools are or resources that they need to help them move forward. How can we elevate the cause by coming alongside and being good stewards and good partners of the work? The third area, recruitment and retention. The recruitment piece, if you want to see the diversification of your employees, you got to actively work towards that. So we have to go out and create pipelines. We have to establish relationships. We have to go into spaces that we may have not or may have been before, right? But we have to strengthen those. We also can't, we can no longer be in the place of, well, the brand will bring in the people. The brand will bring in the people. But if you want to see that diversification, you have to also plant the seeds and water it and watch it grow, right? The retention piece is, how are you responding to the people in real time that you have here now? How can you learn from the experiences even of the most marginalized person? If they aren't having the most favorable experience, what can we learn from that? To continue to curate this culture of what moving forward looks like will have the most marginalized and disenfranchised individual or population in mind, because we're preparing the space, right? We're willing to take a hard pause in our workday to reflect on the happenings in the world and how they're impacting our people, right? Fully recognizing that these conversations can be polarizing, these conversations can be difficult, they can be uncomfortable, but where you typically can find change, where you can find progress, where you can find growth, it's in that stretch area. When we lean into the uncomfortable moments, the uncomfortable conversations, and then start that process of that self-work. Here's why I feel uncomfortable. Here's where that comes from, because it positions you now to be back in a position of power, to make the unconscious conscious and start to order our steps moving forward. And then the fourth area is in regards to supplier diversity. So similar to creating pipelines and opportunities for marginalized communities to gain employment, we're doing the same thing with businesses. How can we create moments where we can connect with local businesses, minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, LGBTQ-owned businesses, veteran businesses, to do the work with us? Because they're here. So how do we find them? And that's what I'm focused on, creating those opportunities, creating pipelines, creating connections, continuing education so we can continue the great work that we have done in the past and be more purposeful moving forward.
That's powerful. Thank you for sharing all of that. In that, I heard a lot about how you were trying to build an inclusive culture. You're championing a culture of inclusivity at the Indianapolis Colts, and that affects you internally. and that affects people externally, whether that's someone who would want to apply for the Colts, someone who would want to attend a Colts game, or even in some cases where someone would want to work with the Colts in a contracting perspective. Looking at that external piece, just looking a little bit more at the external piece, the optics, conversations around black head coaches has been an issue or has been a topic here recently. I'd be curious what your thoughts are on why it is important for the NFL to have more black head coaches and executives.
So first I'll start by saying representation is important. And I think the conversation that we're largely having around employment opportunities, particularly in the NFL, it creates this moment where it's easier for outsiders to point a finger, right? These numbers are staggering. We can't get around that, right? But I think at the same time when individuals are pointing fingers, their fingers pointing back at you. So I think this is a great learning opportunity for a lot of organizations, that it's one thing to throw a stone and cast blame and say, hey, look at your numbers. But this was a good wake-up call for all of us, all organizations. What's the makeup of your boards? Who are in leadership roles? What pipelines and intentional things have you done to diversify representation within our own organizations? And I think this is a lesson that we will continue to learn from. There are several people who've been outspoken who are not happy with how things are. If you look at the data and representation numbers, so if the players make up this percentage, why aren't we seeing those same opportunities in other areas? And I think that, there are examples within the league where people are making active steps.
Okay.
And I also think that there are a lot of best practices that are out there in other leagues, other organizations, other industries, where there's a blueprint for success. And I think we're at the point now where it's hard to run away from what people see, and now they're looking at what will you do.
So you said that there's some programs that are specifically designed to address this. Can you discuss some of those programs that the NFL has put in place to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion, specifically in regards to the front office and coaching positions?
And so we're familiar with the Rooney Rule, and I think the most recent iteration that you mentioned, where we have to bring on a woman or a person of color in the offensive roles. I think those are steps coming from the league level. But in particular, I'm really proud of the Indianapolis Colts in our organization, because we actually introduced the Tony Dungy Fellowship that came out before that rule, right? Where we recognize the history that Coach Tony Dungy made and the impact that he's had for this city, for the state, and the character, the person that he is. And to be able to launch a fellowship in his honor, to bring on an intentional approach to create opportunities for coaches, I think that's amazing. It speaks to, we see a need, we're going to address said need before we're told to do it. So really proud of the organization and the great work that this year's fellows will do.
Perfect. Fair or unfair, sports are often looked to first for their opinions on the greater, happenings in society. The NFL certainly is looked to for its response on DEI efforts. I'd be curious what you think. What can other industries learn from the sports industry about how to tackle DEI work?
It's funny you asked that. It kind of goes back to how I answered the earlier question of, we can point to a problem, right? It's really easy to identify what other people are doing wrong. But I think that it's important for organizations or departments or individuals even to look in the mirror. What work do we have to have? What work do we need to do in the process of this journey? How are we avoiding stagnation and saying, hey, we're good. We are happy to be where we are. That can tend to lead towards a state of complacency, right? So how are we being proactive? How can we recognize, here's where we are, but here are opportunities for us to do so much more? How do we push past the surface, particularly in the conversations around DEI, and really embrace what that really means and what that looks like? I think that, again, a lot of the conversations, when they're starting around DEI, we're typically thinking that's race only, right? And doing this work, you have to have this understanding that it goes a lot further than just race, right? So for an organization to actually do this work, to make it sustainable, you have to do those internal assessments of where are we starting from? Where are our gaps? the way that we can start doing that work is start to pick up the tendencies and the trends. Can we look at our different demographics within the departments and see, well, who's represented? To take a conscious look at what voices, thoughts, experiences, and backgrounds are not in the room, are not represented here. Let's look at our hiring practices. Let's look at our job descriptions and how we're writing them. Language is powerful, and those things could add to some of the perceived or actual barriers that prevent us from trying to do this work in this space and progress these truly inclusive spaces. And then it's leaning into that. Well, what is a truly inclusive space, and who has the authority to deem the space to be inclusive or equitable? So it's a lot of work, right? It takes a commitment. Doing the DEI work, creating positions, creating task force, those things won't instantaneously change over your culture. Culture change, according to the literature that's out there, typically takes around 8 years. That's 8 hard, rough, uncomfortable years. A lot of change, a lot of turnover. Are people willing to step into that? So it's a commitment. You know, we hear so many people say, it's a journey, right? It's a marathon, not a sprint. You gotta be invested in doing it,
right?
And you have to continue to do it. If you go out and you simply try to just recruit a bunch of different people, again, have we prepared the space to cut down that turnover? Have you placed yourself in a space where the work that you're doing is not performative, but sustainable? And what's your why behind doing it? Are you doing the work to be celebrated? Are you doing the work because other people, your competitors are doing it? Or are you listening to your people who are in there day to day and say, hey, here's our experience and here's how we can improve it?
I appreciate all of the expertise you've shared today. One final question for you. This one's kind of a fantasy question. We know that the ultimate success in an NFL season culminates with a Super Bowl championship.
Yeah.
What would a DEI championship look like for the Colts?
For me, I think that a DEI championship would mean that the people that are a part of this organization understand the value that they bring. That regardless of your background, you see yourself as a part of contributing to a winning culture. The things that you do on the front office side, whether you're an intern, you're selling tickets, you're in the different departments, those things are all contributing to this overall winning culture. That winning culture is then created because of this family environment. Then when you come in, you understand your value, you know your worth, and you're made to feel as if you do matter and you belong. So a championship with me would mean that the people in this organization know the value. And while the percentages and the numbers of representation are something that we're going to actively work towards, members of those marginalized communities won't feel like they're on the outside because we found something that united us. And then we were there for each other when and if things happen that challenge some of those notions of, I don't feel like part of me belongs here, when we know that our family's here for us. That's my championship.
I love it. Thank you for the opportunity to hear your thoughts today, Brian. The city and probably most of the state of Indiana is excited for the upcoming season and the Super Bowl chase for the Colts and the DEI championship chase for your office. The conversation doesn't stop here. It's been quite a pleasure to speak with you and hear from how our Indianapolis Colts are thinking about the DEI work. So thank you for that.
My pleasure.
Now let's hear from our sponsors.
Before we started CARE formally, and after the killing of George Floyd, one of the things that myself and many of my leaders did is we talked to Black employees throughout our organization and actually in our community too. And I learned a lot from that. One thing I learned is that our experiences are not the same. As a white person, my life in the United States is not the same as theirs. And it's not the same in some really, really personal ways. And I learned that their life is being impacted by this ongoing systemic effect. It wasn't just the personal behaviors of a few people. It was everywhere. We have to bring ourselves all together, bring our talent, our resources, our thinking, our creativity towards dismantling a system that hurts our friends, hurts our neighbors, and hurts us most of all, and change it. And great to know that we need to change it. Now what to do? And that's really was the birth of CARE.
Cummins has a long and proud history of being a leader in business and industry on important social issues, and the CARE program certainly adds to our legacy.
Cummins has always had a history of investing in the communities where our employees and their families live and work, by now investing in African American businesses, by helping to empower them to grow, to thrive, and to be sustained for the long term. We're not only empowering these businesses, but we are helping to create more inclusive, empowered communities that these businesses serve.
One of the most important things that CARE has done is to create programs that not only help to create equity in the communities in which Cummins does business, but to create an awareness among the Cummins family internally about bias, about equal access to opportunity. And I do believe that as we go forward, it will be a competitive differential for the company.
I believe that it's important for us to be involved in CARE because Cummins is a good corporate citizen, and we talk a lot about how important it is to lift up our communities. And there are many people in many of our communities in which we're located in who are suffering. So the CARE initiatives have helped us be proactive and engaged in those communities.
You know, I've been focusing my work on the social justice, the community side of CARE, and of course I'm partial to the work that we're doing in our communities. I think the volunteers who have come together all around the United States and in a number of CARE communities have made an enormous impact already in the areas of wealth building, equity and home ownership. Police reform has been incredibly effective, especially here in Indianapolis, where we've really been a significant part of the conversation. So there's a whole array of social justice issues that I think we're beginning to tackle. I feel very optimistic about.
Through the one-year mark, the area I believe we've had the biggest impact is helping small Black-owned businesses survive the pandemic and associated economic lull.
I think CARE has made the most impact in two unique ways. One, it's given our employees an opportunity to engage in the communities and areas in which they feel committed and passionate about. And then secondly, it's also made us look inward at what we can do better for our employees at the company. So I think it's had both an external and an internal benefit to be working on CARE.
I'm really proud of what we've achieved with CARE. There's no question we've got a long way to go. The more we learn, the more we want to get done. But I'm so impressed with the volunteers, with the programs that we've run, the things that we've learned, and the businesses and community organizations that we've impacted. And we already have 150 volunteers from Cummins involved in CARE. We've already placed $21 million from Cummins into organizations that are benefiting our communities of color and countering systemic racism. We've also helped 311 different Black-owned businesses with small loans, with equity, with financial counseling, with support. So this impact has already spread widely. We're influencing state houses, we're influencing police departments. So the talent, the energy, the resources that Cummins can bring to this issue has all played out, and all I can say is thank you. I'm so grateful to the people that have done that, and I'm really proud of what we've achieved.
I am so very proud of our team members, of the employees who are volunteering their time and making a difference in the communities where our programs have been launched. It's important to remember that change takes time. It's a journey. So hang in there, and thank you for demonstrating that you care.